Nikki, fellow Toastmasters, guest, Krista. I was 12 years old and standing hip deep in Sheep Creek, fishing a beautiful hole. My dad had walked upstream a couple hours ago to fish further up the waters. I had been fishing but not catching anything. I tried lots of flies, no strikes. In the book, a river runs through it. The first line of that book is, in our family, there was no clear line drawn between fly fishing and religion. And so it was in my family. My father would recite from his catechism about those fishermen must have been driven by the devil to put a worm on a hook. Or, for God's sake, putting a wiggly maggot on a dry fly. And then he'd talk about that it was virtuous to be stumped in fly fishing and to have filled your creel full of fish using worms was evil. My father taught me how to fly fish. He taught me how to tie flies, and he taught me how to find fish on the waters. Although I wasn't catching anything, I was using all of the basics that my father had taught me. Throwing the line, casting it way out, pulling out the line, going further out, and then using the weave to pull that line back in. The weave. Pull it back out, all the line would fly back out. I didn't mind not catching anything because I felt virtuous. You see, there was always peace on the river. When my father and I were together on the river, there was peace. It wasn't like that the night before. My mom and my sister and I sat around the table waiting for Dad to come home for dinner. And he finally came home late, mean drunk. And so there was arguments, yelling, screaming, slamming the doors, and tears as my sister and I went up to bed. And we're on the water. It never happened. My father came back down through the brush. I could hear him tumbling down, and he had the creel around his neck, and it was hung over like this, and it was full of fish. Brown trout, a whole pile of them. "How are you doing?" he yelled out over the roar of the river. "Haven't caught anything. What you got on?" "That's a red and white." Well, red and white is a pattern that he designed. And I had learned to tie myself. And so both of us had a pile of them in our fly box. And so my dad took off his creel and set it down on the big boulder alongside the river and sat down on the boulder. And he bit with his teeth through the leader and took off his fly. Opened up his fly box, put that in, and took out a red and white. Stuck the leader through, tied a turtle knot over the fly, pulled it tight, bit off the end with his teeth. And he got waist deep, he got next to me, and he starts to throw the red and white right next to mine, like that. And then he starts, he says, "What you need to more focus on is the weed. Just grab it, and then go boom, 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 grab it." He had on a fish, a 2-pound brown trout that he pulled out right in the same damn hole that I had. Some of you may think that it was my dad was one-upsmanship of a father over his son, but I never saw it that way. This was really the maestro, teaching his son how to fish. 50 years later, the last day of my father's life, he couldn't talk, but he could respond. And I told him the only thing that we could talk about was fishing. That's all that was left. And I said, Dad, you really ticked me off the day that you caught that fish on the red and white and took it right out of the hole. And my dad had a smile on his face. And then he was gone. And the things that could have been discussed could no longer be discussed. You know, our fathers affect us all in various ways. Some too little, some too much, and some are far too close, and some are far too distant. There's a thread I can see that runs through my life now and runs through my soul and my father's soul. It's a river. A river runs through it. Because when we're ever in the river, it was peace. And for all of us, one of our goals should be to look for those times when we were together on the river. When our Father taught us some secret of life. And where things were quiet and nice. It was a couple months later when I returned to Sheep Creek, 50 years later, to spread my father's ashes. And as I spread his ashes on Sheep Creek, which flows eventually into the Missouri River and into the Mississippi and out to sea, I also remember the last line of the book, A River Runs Through It. I am haunted by waters.